Why is Volkswagen in so much trouble? Why has the CEO recently demanded a massive €10 billion cut in costs just to be able to survive? Is Volkswagen going bust? Why can't they sell their EVs? Now, I would advise you, if you haven't seen it already, please watch my video, Made in China, link to that down below, as that sets the scene in much greater detail for this video. Now, definitions are confusing, but Volkswagen is probably the largest car manufacturer in the world. I say confusing and probably because what is the largest? Is it the highest number of cars produced, or the largest turnover, or the most valuable, or the most profitable? Well, all of these would produce different results, but in general, Toyota and VW Group are recognised as the largest in the world. And all of that was achieved with good old traditional fossil fuel powered internal combustion engine cars, the thing they're really good at, not these newfangled EVs which probably will never catch on anyway. They sold their cars all around the world, not just in Europe. In fact, the biggest single market recently became China, at that time a rapidly growing country with loads of money. Now, you can argue they sell more cars in another country or make more profit elsewhere, and different brands within the group, like Lamborghini, Seat and Bentley, have different figures, but China became the most important market for most Japanese and European car manufacturers. Well, as my Made in China video reveals, over 20 years ago, China just decided to become even more successful as a car manufacturer than Toyota had achieved in the 80s and right through to today. They concluded, just like Japan did, it would take a decade or two to achieve this target. Japanese early efforts were pitiful and didn't sell abroad. China also concluded that within those 2 decades, that the ICE car market would be past its peak, shrinking, and the EV market would be growing, perhaps surging. So they switched 100% of their effort to either hybrids or BEVs, battery electric vehicles, and over the last 2 decades, they've been perfecting all they need to achieve this target. The government gave massive subsidies to EV and battery makers, and now they are already becoming the largest battery electric vehicle car manufacturing country in the whole world. Years ago, they scaled up to mass production, where the costs fell dramatically and quality improved. Then in 2018, Tesla opened its Gigafactory Shanghai, and they were able to see in really great detail what Tesla made, how it made them, what Western people wanted from their EV. It was suggested that half the initial workers in the Gigafactory were actually workers from Chinese EV companies paid by their bosses to learn all they could and bring it back to them. And this they did with huge success. So, VW or BMW or Toyota or any legacy auto manufacturer you care to name, but I'll just use VW, sometime about 10 years ago, they found that China had become the biggest market, buying up their ICE cars in huge numbers, and all looked rosy. But recently there came the perfect storm. Any one situation on its own would not have had a big impact, but when they all coincided, the result was instantly catastrophic and terminal. Well, first, the Chinese gradually began buying their own home-produced EVs as they got better and better and cheaper, instead of VW's quality-built ICE cars. Then the government incentives became so massive, they made them cheaper to buy. The ICE market slowly began to plateau, then actually shrink. Then the sale of ICE cars in Europe and America also peaked and plateaued, and also ever so slowly began to shrink. Then came Dieselgate, which pretty much destroyed the sale of diesel cars overnight and cost them huge sums of money in fines and compensation, wiping out any profits. About then, Tesla launched the Model S to worldwide success, and it quickly became the absolute champion despite a ridiculously high price. But more importantly, it showed the world that an EV could be exciting and amazing and different and leave Porsches and Lamborghinis standing at the traffic lights while costing dramatically less and being a full 5-seater family car. EVs had arrived. So next, VW and all the others decided to have a go. Well, not seriously, they didn't want to destroy their own ICE markets and profits, but they should have a go. And they hit an immediate problem. Despite having 100 years' experience and being the world leader and having masses of money and factories everywhere and a brand that was widely recognised, they found that making EVs ignored all that. With incredible naivety, they'd all believed they could just switch to EVs and resume business as normal, totally ignoring the fact that Tesla started their learning curve in 2008 and had a decade of first-hand experience and knowledge and failures before bringing a mass-produced car, the Model 3, to the market and starting to make a profit. The Chinese also had over 2 decades of experience and knowledge and at least 1 decade's experience in mass-producing them. Well, VW found that the guys and girls who assembled and bolted on fuel injection systems and assembled and bolted on gearboxes had no idea how to wire up and program an EV display. So they did what they all did and had done for decades. They bought EV components in from the cheapest suppliers around the world and bolted them all in place. And they didn't work. They found out what Tesla and China had found out over a decade earlier, that many of the bits you need are just not available off the shelf, forcing you to either budget or investigate making your own. They all chose to budge. Now, once again, this applies not just to VW. Jim Farley, CEO of Ford, recently said in an interview that Ford has long since become assemblers of parts produced elsewhere. Each part has its own proprietary software that Ford cannot touch because it's licensed under the supply contract. Take a tailgate electric motor. While any tailgate motor will happily work on any tailgate and happily be controlled by a simple mechanical push button on the tailgate, it cannot accept commands from the main computer display. So when Ford buys these components that cannot talk to either the car or other components in the car, even though they can see the answer, they cannot touch it themselves. They have to go back to the supplier and ask them. And this all takes time. They have to wait while the supplier investigates and agrees a change, then wait while it's implemented, and then wait for the new part to be delivered. Well, Tesla in China realised 2 decades ago that the only answer was vertical integration. Make them all yourself. Which, coincidentally, is exactly what got Ford started over 100 years ago. Their first factory manufactured absolutely everything needed on the production. Engines, gearboxes, chassis, seats, right down to windscreens. It was an instant success because they controlled absolutely every part of the process and cut out the middleman and his profit. That business model was abandoned a long time ago in favour of just-in-time suppliers, where you place orders with whichever supplier is cheapest and have them deliver those parts to an agreed schedule just as they are needed. Well, sorry for the long explanation, but I agree with many of my viewers when they say that when Ford or Volkswagen or GM or Toyota make the decision to make their own EVs, they should be able to destroy Tesla overnight. They should. But then we've seen recently in Ukraine that while the Russian army should have been able to just conquer Ukraine in a matter of days, things sometimes are not so easy to actually do. VW's 100-year experience is proving to be as worthless as it would be to ask a senior consultant surgeon with 40 years training and experience to suddenly become a successful senior barrister. It takes a bit more than retraining, and it takes a very long time. Time that Tesla and the Chinese have already used to put them where they are. Time that Ford and VW and BMW and Toyota are only just discovering they need to take. And that leads to why they all might go bankrupt in the next decade. Well, VW and all the others need money from their successful, profitable ICE car sales to fund the time, effort and training it will take over the next decade to make them competitive in making EVs. And time is the one thing they really have run out of. You see, the biggest market is China, or should I say it was. With the massive government incentives on offer, Chinese people are now almost exclusively buying Chinese-made EVs. VW's ICE car market over there is collapsing rapidly, along with all the other ICE car companies. And with it goes their profits to fund their conversion to EVs. To answer this, VW has started to produce EVs of their own, but having arrived so late into the market and found it to be, well, not quite as simple as they thought, their efforts are being rejected by the Chinese people. Quite simply, Chinese-made EVs are a decade ahead of VW's EVs in quality, technology and efficiency. The Chinese people really do not want to buy out-of-date technology. Now we're starting to see legacy automakers beginning to ask governments for massive $10, $20 billion loans. Well, why not just refinance? Well, the banks won't let them. You see, their existing loans and debts are simply massive, totally off the scale. Toyota is the most indebted company ever in the history of the planet. VW and Ford are close behind. Now that on its own is not too serious, but interest rates are rising, so the debt is getting bigger, and the only security they can offer the banks is the factories that they own that are 100% dedicated to making ICE cars, which they can no longer sell. If you were a bank, would you lend billions secured by factories that are already being shut down for long periods because they cannot sell all the cars that they already produce? A factory that makes a product that does not sell is not a security, it's a liability. So they turn to the governments for subsidies, but here they meet a problem. Their governments are already actively supporting and subsidising clean energy technologies to try to rid themselves of the polluted, deadly air that costs them a fortune in healthcare and contingencies for the future effects of climate change, caused partly or mainly by pollution spewed out by the very ICE cars they're trying to phase out. Well, politics dictates they will nevertheless subsidise the ICE car manufacturers. No minister or senator will ever get re-elected if they are directly responsible for refusing a loan or subsidy and having the auto manufacturer go bust and lay off all its workers. But the race is on. If ICE sales keep dropping and their profits keep falling and their market share dwindles away all around the world, while they have to spend ever-increasing sums of money to convert to making EVs at scale, which will win out? Well, Tesla went through several periods like this. In 2014, again in 2017, where they were in real danger of going bust. 2017 all hinged on the successful launch of their Model 3. Well, fortunately it was a success, but had it not been, Tesla today would no longer exist. It was that close. Now, our legacy makers are at that 2014 or 2017 Tesla point financially. The final piece of the perfect storm is that China and Tesla have long since passed through that phase and are now reaping huge rewards. Their profit margins are in a totally different league to any previous or current ICE manufacturer. They're ploughing some of those rewards back into future developments, accelerating even further ahead in the race. There is a real fear that many legacy automakers will not have the funds to be able to convert, and even those who manage to convert and produce their first truly competitive EV and be able to make a profit in, say, 5 or 10 years' time, will they be able to sell it if it is already 5 years out of date on launch day? Would you buy a brand new mobile phone if its camera and processor and AI were all 5 years out of date? Well, there is one possible answer that I think they see, but even that is unlikely to work. This week, VW and BMW have both announced they are exploring it seriously. If they can't make a competitive EV that their customers will buy and make a profit, why not let the Chinese do it? Get them to make the cars and just badge them BMW, VW or Porsche. Well, as explained in my Made in China video, link below, China's a great place to make products like your iPhone or Dyson vacuum cleaner or plastic toys, but the design of those products was done in the West, and China is merely used as a production centre offering really cheap labour and really lax safety standards. VW, BMW and the like cannot do that because their problem is they cannot design an EV that is more competitive than what the Chinese are already doing, far cheaper and more successfully. If they could, then that's exactly what they would be doing. But now, the final nail in the coffin, the Chinese economy is collapsing. Recently, they've had a huge crash in property values and their finance section. And China is likely going into a massive downturn. Their home market is slowing down, and that includes EVs. So all eyes in China are now turning to the West. We are still buying EVs, America, Europe, Australia, UK, in fact in exponentially increasing numbers. That is a market they want to exploit. That is why we're seeing in the UK companies like MG, Polestar, BYD, NIO, Geely, XPeng, and a dozen others as yet unheard of makes, all launching cheap new models this year and next. And if the Chinese market collapses totally, that makes us even more attractive. Now, VW, BMW and the rest could just ask the Chinese to make the cars for them, lock, stock and barrel, and just badge them accordingly. But why should they do that? Why sell an EV to BMW at trade price when they can make it and sell it at market price to us in the West directly and make a much better profit? What's in it for BMW and VW? They're unlikely to be able to buy those cars as cheaply as they hope for, and are extremely unlikely to be able to sell them as a premium brand EV if the whole world knows that they're simply Chinese cars designed and made in China, rebadged. Why not just buy it cheaper, direct from the Chinese? Why not indeed? Well, sorry, legacy automakers, but I can see no way out of this. I look back to Kodak. I'm a keen photographer, and at one time Kodak ruled the photographic world. Their Ektachrome and Kodachrome films were world leaders. Only Agfa and Ilford offer any competition at all. They also made cameras by the million that were used all over the world. Remember the Box Brownie, Instamatic? Well, Kodak met the arrival of the first digital cameras with complacency and complete disdain. Rubbish resolution, poor quality, no threat to us. Well, too late, they found that the poor quality quickly led to very high quality products that were equal to film, then finally better. Far too late, Kodak recognised this and tried to switch to making digital cameras. Too late to avoid bankruptcy. Look also at Nokia. In the recent past, it was the only name in mobile phones, outselling all others worldwide. 10 years ago, it went bust and sold out to Microsoft. Beaten by the iPhone. They tried to resurrect the brand, but even Microsoft has ceased making mobile phones today. Our legacy automakers and oil giants are not unique. They're not protected species. They are simply in denial. Still, they think they are fighting the war to beat EVs and regain their power and dominance and once again rule supreme around the world. The fact is, they had the chance and they failed. That war has already been fought and lost. They just don't recognise it. Well, just like the Russians, who are still desperately trying to win the war in Ukraine. What they and legacy automakers and oil giants should be negotiating is how to get out of this mess they themselves have created with some measure of success and without losing everything. If their time has come, they will all end up as successful as Kodak and Nokia and BlackBerry and Sony Betamax and Apple iPod and Sony Walkman and Spangles and, well, the list is endless. Thanks for watching to the end. Please subscribe if you like this video. I'm Dave.